From typography scale to color palette to spacing values, border radius, input fields, and finally to buttons, we've added all of that to our design system and we are almost set to get to the mobile app and the website. But today we're going to be touching on radio buttons, and in the next tutorial we're going to be touching on checkboxes. I'll be demonstrating how you can add radio buttons to your design system, and we're going to work on a little prototype and test it out to see how it actually works when you try to interact with the radio button. Before we get to that, what exactly are radio buttons? Radio buttons allow users to select an item from a predefined list. So the key word there is an item. You can select just one item out of a list of items. So if you have a list of items from 1 to 100, then you can select only one option from that list and you can't select any other. Now, if you have to select multiple options, you have to go with checkboxes, but in this case, we want to focus just on radio buttons. If you look at my canvas, I've already gone ahead to add a section and the subtitles, so the different states, and the radio button. So this shows us that we're going to be working on the checkboxes next. I've also gone ahead to add a shade to our color palette on an initial color group. We've added this dark gray to the group. So you can go ahead and add this to your group if you are following with me. I'll just close this so that it gets out of the way. And we're going to start by creating our radio button. The first state is going to be an unselected state. So when a user hasn't selected a particular option, then that is an unselected state. A state becomes selected when the user clicks on the option and selects that option. Hover, we already touched on hover. When a user takes the mouse and goes over the option, then something in the appearance will have to change to indicate that there has been some sort of a movement. And finally, the disabled state is when the user can't select or interact at all with that radio button. To create our radio button, we're going to first create a circle. We'll come to the toolbar and click on the drop down. If your circle is not selected, you need to click on the drop down and select the ellipse tool. You tap on the shift key on your keyboard and you drag, and it actually scales this proportionately. When you're comfortable, you leave both keys, and we want to adjust the width and the height from the properties panel. We're going to enter 20 by 20. So the width and height is going to be 20. And we need to make sure that the link icon is selected to indicate that it constrains its proportions. The next thing we're going to do is to add a stroke of 2. And we are going to change the color to the dark gray we just created. Make sure that we remove the fill because it's supposed to indicate that this particular radio button is unselected. The next thing we're going to do is add text. You click on the text tool and we're going to click once on our canvas. Call this label option. We already created a text style, so I want us to apply the text style we had earlier created, which is going to be the paragraph style. And we are good with that. We'll select both the circle and the option, and we're going to hit the shift and A key on our keyboard to give this an auto layout. We'll make sure that we change the horizontal gap, apply variables. So if you've been following with me, you know that we have already created spacing values. So we're going to just click on apply variable and we're going to select 12, which is number 4. When you're done with that, the last thing we're going to do here is change this color to the color we just added, which is the dark gray too. And that is our unselected state. We'll duplicate this and change the appearance for the selected states. The first thing we're going to do here is to ungroup this, hit Ctrl and backspace on your keyboard, and we're going to duplicate this ellipse or circle, change the dimension to 12, and we'll give this a fill of the shade 2, and we're going to take out the stroke. Now this stroke, we're going to give it the same shade we gave to the circle. Select both and align it to the middle and to the center. When you're done, we're going to hit the Ctrl and G key on our keyboard. We'll select the option. When both options are selected, we're going to hit the Shift and A key on our keyboard again to group it and to give this auto layout. Now we need to give it the same spacing that we applied to the first, which is 12. So we click on the drop down and we're going to click on apply variable. We'll select the same 12. And one thing you're going to notice is that when we hit the auto layout, we do not align it to the center. So you notice that there's some sort of a spacing under here. So we need to make this adjustment for both. Select the two options that we just created, and we're going to come to our auto layout panel, and we're going to click on the align to the left. The next thing we're going to do is to create the hover option. Now with the hover option, I would like to take this out, and I would like to give this the shade 2. And for the disabled option, I'm going to give this the light gray shade, so it indicates that you can't do anything with this particular radio button. So we've created our radio buttons, but for now it's not yet a component. Remember that components allow us to create reusable elements. So in order to add this to our component library, we're going to select all the options that we just created. And when we are done with this, we're going to come to our component icon, click on the drop down, very important, click on the drop down, and we're going to create a component set. So when we've created a component set, we need to give the component set a title, and that is going to be radio button. Now, the next thing we'll have to do is to create our properties and values. So remember, our property is going to be a state, which is going to be unselected, selected, hover, and disabled. So the name of our property is going to be state, and the value of our properties are going to be unselected, selected, hover, and disabled. So the first one, we're going to make sure that we change the property, double click where you have property 1, we're going to change that to state. And for our very first value, we're going to call the first option unselected. The second option is going to be selected. The third is going to be hover. And the fourth is going to be disabled. Great. So we have created a component set, and if you are not planning on working on a prototype, then you can leave it at this. It's still going to be the same look if you want to apply it or add it to your designs or your various screens. But today we want to touch on how to create a simple prototype for your radio buttons. So what are we going to do? In order to create a prototype, the first thing we're going to do is to go to the prototype tab, which is just by the design tab. Click on it once. And like we earlier mentioned, prototype allows us to just create interactive elements. When you come to the prototype tab, the next thing you have to determine is where to start. In this case, we want users to tap, click, or hover over an unselected state, which is going to be this state. So which means that this is going to be our starting point. Make sure you click on the starting point. Now with the first option being selected, you notice that when I hover over the box, there is some sort of a node that appears. So this node with a plus at the very center allows us to create connections between one or more elements. It could be between one or more frames or one or more screens. So in this case, I want us to create a connection between the unselected and first the hover states. Because we are thinking of this logically. When a user wants to select an option, the first thing they see is the unselected option. The next thing they do is they want to see if they can select that option. And before they do that, it means that they will have to hover over that option. And after they hover over the option, they will have the option to choose, that is to select it or to leave it unselected. So in this case, we're going to first of all deal with the hover option. So we have created this connection, and if in case for some reason we don't want to use this connection again, we can just click on this connection we just created and we drop it out and it removes the connection. But in this case, we still need to use the connection. So I'm going to undo what I just did and make sure that the connection is still going to be between the unselected and the hover state. Now, we need that pop-up box that just appeared to reappear. What I'm going to do is to click on the connection, and it's going to now bring up a pop-up box that allows me to manipulate the various interaction details. So the first thing here is going to be the triggers. And we are going to focus on 2 triggers. So the first trigger is going to be the hover trigger. And how do we find this? We click on this drop down arrow and we're going to select the while hovering. So you see that there are so many triggers here, but we will not get into that. Our focus is going to be on hovering and on clicking. So the first state is going to be while hovering. So when I hover over this radio button, what happens? I want it to take me to the hover state. So you see that when I connected this to this, it already automatically selected the hover state. The next thing you may want to worry about is the option of smart animation. So smart animation is a feature that just enables smooth transitions and animations between different elements. With this, you can create more dynamic and intuitive prototypes. So in this case, we are going to select the smart animate. We have instant. With instant, there is no animation at all. With dissolve, it kind of creates some sort of a fade in, fade out kind of animation. But for now, we are going to be sticking to the smart animate option. And the ease out, you can change the duration. You can change the type of animation. We could still leave ease out, or we could choose ease in and out. I will select ease in and out. I'm okay with this particular interaction. I'm going to close this. We have created a connection between the unselected and the hover state. We'll go back to our design tab where we're going to be adding to our component library a list that allows us to select from 2 options. That could be option 1 or 2, or let's say yes and no. Now we're going to go back to the design tab and we're going to be making use of the states that we already created. This is going to be our option 1 and this is going to be our option 2. So I'll just change the label to make it more visible, or to make the changes more visible. And we're going to give this option 2. If we click on this, we want option 1 to be selected and we want option 2 to be unselected, because remember this is a radio button. And if we click on 2, we want option 2 to be selected and option 1 shouldn't be selected. We are going to duplicate this and we're just going to interchange it. So first we're going to give this hit shift A to give it an auto layout, and shift A to give the second one an auto layout. For the second one, we are going to hit the arrow left key once to change the position. We're going to change the label here to option 1 and we'll change the label here to option 2. From this point, we are going to make this a component also. So remember that these are all individual components, but now we want to make a new component that is going to function for 2 options. So if you want to have 3 options and from those 3 options you want to select 1, you have to now create another variant. In this case, our first variant is going to have just 2 options, and this is just for the tutorial. So we're going to create a component for this. Make sure all of this is selected, and we're going to come to the icon for the components and we're going to click on create a component set. We're going to call this radio yes no. You can give it any label, that's just for this tutorial. And we're going to change the property name to count or type. So I will just say count just because in this case it's going to be 2 options. So the count is going to be 2 options. So if you want more options, you can add the options, but here I'll just say count. When you're done, you hit the enter key on your keyboard. Now this is going to be our first option. So the first option is going to be with option 2 selected. If we had called this yes and no, we would have just said yes, but we'll just say option 2 selected. This is more demonstrative. And this second one is going to be option 1 selected. Okay, so this is how it's going to work. Now, the next thing we're going to do is to create a prototype for this. So we make sure that if we click on option 1, it means that option 1 is going to be selected. And if we click on option 2, it means that option 2 is going to be selected. We're going to go back to our prototype tab. What we're going to do is to select option 1 first, because we want to make sure that if we click on this particular element, then it's going to change to this, which means that we want option 1 to be selected. Ensure that the box is actually highlighted, and we're going to create a connection, and we'll make sure that when the arrow changes from blue to purple, we're going to leave it at that. It tells us that it's going to change to count where option 1 is selected, and that is what we want. We're not going to change anything on the setting. The next thing is we're going to click on option 2. So if I click on option 2, what should happen? I'm going to create a new connection and make sure that it changes from blue to purple. It needs to automatically change to option 2 being selected. So that is a prototype we have created. How are we going to test this out? We are going to go to presentation view in order to preview or to test out what we just created. But before we do that, we are going to go back again to the design tab. We're going to bring down an instance of this radio button set that we just added. The first radio buttons were created just because we needed to make sure that the various states were added to our component library. But this is going to allow us to actually test out if a user can choose between the two options, one or the other. So we're going to click on this. I'm bringing out both. We're not bringing out a single item. We'll click on this and drag it out. And we're going to go to the presentation view that allows us to preview our interactions live. We can locate the icon by going to the top right where we have the play icon. Click on it once and a new tab is going to open where you can preview whatever screens you have created, whatever elements you have worked on your prototype. It's going to be previewed on the presentation view. We're going to scroll to the bottom where we already created our radio buttons. This is what we want to test out, and we already see the difference. When we hover over option 1, notice that the color changed. And now what happens if I click on option 1? Means that option 2 is deselected and option 1 is selected. If I hover over option 2, you see that it changes, but when I click on option 2, option 1 is deselected and option 2 is selected. So guys, this is how you create radio button components and then prototypes that can actually show how the user is going to interact with that particular element. Till next time, practice, practice, practice. If you have any questions, you can leave it in the comment box. And if you want me to work on any other tutorial, just let me know by dropping a comment. Don't forget to like, don't forget to share, and don't forget to subscribe.